Greetings. Welcome to the first module on this session on diabetes learning. The first session is going to be pathophysiology of type 2 diabetes. I know it is going to be a very boring, a very theoretical session. It is like other sessions, we have tried to make it as practical, as convenient. The learning is slightly different compared to what is over here, because you need to understand some of the raw theories for you to build on the knowledge of diabetes. So it is going to be very theoretical. Having said that, we will try to make it as simple and as practical as possible also, but bear with me, this is going to be a lengthy theoretical session. As we have understood the diabetes, right from the early stages, like where the hyperglycemia, whenever we in a type 2 diabetic. So the hyperglycemia, the traditional age-old learning is, it is all because of three things. One is there is an impaired insulin secretion, there is an increased hepatic glucose production, and there is a decreased glucose output, decreased glucose uptake by the muscles. So this is how the traditional learning earlier it was. So now we have looked at, especially Diffranso has published a series of good articles on the pathophysiology of diabetes. There are many review articles available on the subject by the same author, where he has conceptualized this concept of looking at from the three things, rather looking at from 8 different perspectives. It is called as triumvirate to the ominous octet. So there are 8 different mechanisms or 8 different organs through which we can look at the pathophysiology of diabetes from various angles. So that is how he has put in. So we will also, like rather than going into the traditional way of what happens to the pathophysiology, we'll look at the pathophysiology of diabetes through the various organs. What happens at the level of liver, what happens at the level of kidneys. So that is how we have tuned. Few topics we have tried to make it very simpler, because the understanding the conceptualization of these concepts can be learnt later also, which we will dwell in the subsequent sessions. So we have concentrated the first three things: the impaired insulin secretion, the increased hepatic glucose output, increased hepatic glucose production, and the decreased glucose output we will take in detail. And we will talk about the diabetes from the adipose tissue and alpha cells also in detail. The rest of the three things which are there, we will deal it very shortly, but you can learn it later, as we said. So the first thing is impaired insulin secretion. When we mean by impaired insulin secretion, it is all about the beta cells of the pancreas. So the insulin secretion in type 2 diabetes. So when we mean by that, there is an impaired insulin secretion is found uniformly in type 2 diabetics in all ethnic populations. Now we have to understand one thing. So when we mean by diabetes, it is always the insulin resistance that sets in first. So no matter like how much amount of insulin resistance that the patient builds in, what happens is it should be the insulin secretion has to go down to manifest a patient, to call a patient as a diabetic. So the fundamental concept that we need to know is insulin resistance can be present always. So we can measure it by various means, but it doesn't make a person diabetic. For someone to call a diabetic, there should be an impaired or decreased insulin secretion. That is very important. Early in the natural history of type 2 diabetes, insulin resistance is very established, but glucose tolerance remains normal because of a compensatory increase in the insulin production. As we said early in the diabetes, so you may have someone may have a insulin secretion may be normal. The oral glucose tolerance, as we do also, like the 2-hour OGTT also might be normal, but there might be an insulin resistance sets in. So what could be the reason, like the oral glucose tolerance is remaining normal, the insulin secretion is also remaining normal, but at the same time there is an increased insulin resistance. So that we will see it shortly, but we need to understand with the normal oral glucose tolerance and normal insulin secretion, the patient may have a insulin resistance which is setting in and which is into the progress of an evolving diabetes.